and IBM does a lot of good things. And we are working together with IBM on some programs that I'm very proud of. But I am very concerned that with this action they're taking, that they understand the impact on our communities and on the families being affected, and so that's where my focus is. On job growth, look, Chris is right. We get 70% of our jobs from small business. We've got to support that. We have got to keep your taxes low. We've got to get energy costs down, and we've got to do what works. And what I think works is focusing everywhere on public-private partnerships, on giving you a government that isn't part of the problem, that actually invests in the roads and the bridges you need to grow your business, that invests in the education systems that will produce the STEM-educated kids in science and technology and engineering and math who can get high-tech, high-skill jobs in the future. Not everybody's going to Harvard. We've got to support our community colleges, our technical colleges, and we've got to get folks educated in better alignment with the employment that's available so they can come out of school and get a good job and support their family. And we have to bring down the cost of higher education in this country. College costs way too much. Everywhere I go, I listen to families. I got a kid who's 23, believe me, I get it. And I got two little girls, 10 and 12. You cannot spend $54,000 a year on college. And for a lot of families, have it make sense. And one of the things I'm working very hard to do right now is keep the loan rates on college loans from doubling, because a lot of kids can't afford this. And we are in danger of having a generation of subprime students who've invested and tried to do the right thing in college and then come out, can't find a job, or living at home with you, sleeping on your couch, and now they got a bunch of debt. That's crazy. So we have got to focus on these things if we're going to get a well-educated workforce in an economy where there's good infrastructure and good systems, where there's cheap energy so we can make it in America again. We have far too long accepted the lazy notion that all of our manufacturing is going to go somewhere else in the globe. That is ridiculous. It is wrong. We can build things here in the country. We can employ people at good wages with good benefits, and we can do it better than anybody else. And we ought to connect up this region with the nanotechnology corridor south of Albany, which is a great example of the public and private sectors working together to make smart investments where we have an advantage, where we can lead the world. And whether it's the biotech industry in Westchester, whether it's cloud computing analytics here at Marist University right down the street, or whether it's the other things like the healthcare-centered economy in Orange County, all of these things rely on high skills and produce higher wages than most jobs in the country. That's the kind of economy we need to build here. And then leverage our other amazing assets, the beauty of the area, protecting the environment, encouraging tourism, encouraging the arts, which have always played a special role here. And focusing on the educational institutions and the medical institutions that are still thriving. Because I moved my office to Newburgh because I wanted to make clear to folks that we weren't going to forget our small cities in the Hudson Valley. Poughkeepsie and Newburgh have got to be part of the solution. We cannot build an economy where every place is doing well and you still have boarded up buildings up and down Main Street in Newburgh and Poughkeepsie, and you still have all this unused housing, and you still have a problem with crime. We aren't going to get the Hudson Valley right till we get our small cities right too, and that means integrating the economic development between the suburbs and the small cities, and going forward together. And I think that if we just focus on the basics again, if we just do what works, we will be surprised how far and how fast we can travel.
Example of a model that could very well help us along what it's in line with Sean was mentioning. You know, there's a company, Ioxis, that only 3 years ago they were manufacturing these ultra capacitors in Japan. Ultra capacitor is sort of like an energy drink for anything, for a bus, for a Xerox machine, for a wind turbine. It allows it to have more energy and to use it more efficiently. 100 souls were manufacturing this ultra capacitor in Japan. That ultra capacitor is now being manufactured in Oneonta for 53 folks. And what I'm suggesting to you is by using technology and a motivated and educated workforce, you know, we can move jobs that were heretofore been overseas back to the United States, where it's still profitable for the company, but we're the ones actually manufacturing. So, you know, I want to look to see us do more of that going forward.
Question from the audience with regard to Rick.
If I may.
Hold on one second, sir.
This weekend on CBS.
Thank you. This weekend on CBS News Radio 88, there was a series of ads from the state of Texas. And the state of Texas was saying how friendly Texas is to business, how it is ranked #1 in the country in terms of attracting new economic development, #1 in the country in the creation of new jobs over the past 5 years. I also know that there are a lot of surveys, a lot of pundits have said that the state of New York is rated and ranked 49th in the nation in terms of being friendly to business. What, if anything, can be done by looking at the models of the top 20% of the states that are growing, that the economy is growing, that jobs are growing? Clearly, what's happening here in the state of New York, and I know everyone's well-intentioned. We're here because we're well-intentioned, but there's got to be something done a little bit better so that there's not the news of losing 700 jobs. It's the news of a new company moving to the state of New York because of the friendly business environment. I doubt that there are ads in the state of Texas by the state of New York saying, come to New York, we're business friendly. I'm not being critical, but it's like, think of a better mousetrap. What do we do to change this?
Well, first of all, let me just say, yes, it is harder for our companies to compete. We should be very self-aware. We incur energy costs right up front that companies down in Texas don't have to deal with. Beyond that, we have a business environment that is not as competitive, even beyond the energy costs. And so I think the best way to get at the business environment is to get a hold of the spending, because obviously part of the reason why the business environment is not as conducive as other states is because we have to then extract revenues in a way to get after the spending. So to the extent that we can reform our programs here inside the state that allow us tax relief, that we're going to need to take a look at our regulatory process here in the state, and to the degree to which we work together at the federal, state, county level, the public-private partnerships, because I'll tell you, we do have challenges. We have that energy challenge, we have tax and regulatory challenges, but we also have advantages. We have a trained, educated, motivated workforce. And of course, I'm biased, but I think we have one of the best places in the world to live. And you look at, it's worthwhile. Yes, we should learn from our failures, but we should also learn from areas where we've done well. How is it that we won the AMD competition, that when they moved now GlobalFoundries? We ought to learn from that, because that was not a gimme. I mean, we earned that thing fair and square. So, looking at changing the underlying business environment, exploiting the advantages that we do have, and then continuing to do well at the things we already do well. That's why in my opening remarks, I talked about how important it is to see our family farms flourish, that we continue to do better on tourism. And, I see Mary Kay is here. Thank you for her great work here in Dutchess County. But there's more that we can do to exploit on that. Manufacturing, we've got this manufacturer's element here, and we want to try to do everything we can to support it, that we're constantly looking to ways to drive down the other impediments to growth. So, I think it's a mixture of both learning from where we didn't do well and exploiting the things we do well as we look to be empathetic with those who create the jobs, keeping in mind that really we want to focus in on the small businesses, the small and medium-sized businesses. Although to the extent that multinationals stay here and maybe even grow here, that's a wonderful thing. We should just not count on that. What we ought to be doing is doing everything we can to be symbiotic with multinationals to the extent that it's in our interests, but then looking for ways to have our small and medium-sized companies flourish.
Add to that is that, well, first of all, anybody who wants to move to Texas from the Hudson Valley ought to have his head examined. First of all, you don't want to go to Texas, man. Believe me. I mean, if you look at what we got and what they got, you don't want to trade places with them. So there's a reason they're running ads, right? You don't want to be in Texas, but. And I mean that seriously, because if you look at the access to talent, if you look at the access to a well-educated workforce, if you look at the opportunity for cheaper energy, if you look at all the other things that your business needs to thrive, you're as likely to find it here as anywhere. Because what emerging businesses who are going to respond to that kind of appeal are really looking for is they're looking for access to talent. They're looking for well-educated workforce, looking for affordable energy. They're often looking for proximity to major economic centers. We've got the biggest one in the planet, right down the river. They're looking for distribution ease and access to markets. They're looking for proximity to educational institutions that they can partner with. That's a big part of Global Foundries and AMD. Is the Nanotechnology Center at SUNY Albany. When I was in the governor's office, and a lot of your question is directed at state policy. I mean, guys like Chris and I are focused on federal policy, and so some of the most important levers are going to be at the state. But when I was in the governor's office, what I worked on was creating a higher education endowment in New York for the SUNY CUNY system. I thought if SUNY CUNY had an endowment the way all the big privates have, that we could make massive new investments in those 64 campuses all over the state. This is an archipelago of economic opportunity. This is why the governor right now is working on this tax-free New York plan to bring businesses in proximity to those campuses, because those are engines of economic growth. And we wanted to hire 2,500 new faculty. We wanted to fully fund the capital plan. We wanted to invest in those institutions, because that's where your growth is going to come from well-educated kids who want to stay near their home and their family, who can find a good job. You got to have businesses building up around those educational institutions, because they can do the kind of innovative work and get the kind of skills training for kids as they come through school that they're going to need in their workforce. This is one of the things I'm talking about, and actually IBM is supporting a program called P-Tech. We want to bring one of those schools to Newburgh or to Poughkeepsie that will align education with future employment better. So I just think there's nothing wrong with New York that can't be fixed by what's right with New York. There's certainly nothing wrong with the Hudson Valley that can't be fixed. And on the federal level, if we just keep your taxes low, if we invest in infrastructure, if we invest in our schools, if we make sure the agriculture sector around here is working, and we get out of the way and we make sure that healthcare costs don't kill us, I think we will see real economic progress. I think the economy is already getting its legs under it to have a much better year this year and next year and the year after. And if we just stop doing dumb things like sequester that put a big weight in the backpack as we try to run up this hill, I think you're going to see real progress again. And I would say just one last thing. I don't think you can look at the IBM layoff and say it has to do with the policies in the state of New York, in fairness to the governor and the state. I mean, that really has to do with where IBM is a company, what its business strategy is, and the kind of results it's been having this year and last. So I think that's unique to that company, but it sure as hell doesn't hurt to give them a better environment here in New York either.
Gentlemen, I had inquired of both of your staff, so we're bumping up against, I think, when I think you need to leave. But do you one more round or? Sure. Okay. Because I think I'd like to certainly go into the whole issue of the superstorms, which took such a beating on the Hudson Valley. I think one of the things that most of us expect is that when we are in times of need from natural disasters, the federal government will be there to help. The names of Irene, Lee, and Sandy now have a special meaning for the Hudson Valley. In a brief period, the Hudson Valley learned the fury of weather on changing our day-to-day lives. In addition to what has already come in federal aid, known as Sandy Relief, there is more heading our way. The number we hear is actually in the billions. Our region clearly needed the funds, and we thank you very, very much. How are you monitoring the money that is coming to us? And what should we be doing to ensure that the money gets to where it is needed most, so that if it happens again, you guys aren't there trying to defend why New York should get it in 57 or 67 days when Katrina was able to get it in 10 days?
Indeed. In fact, recovering from the storm really defined my first term. Because that Irene and Lee hit right there in August of 11, and that became the #1 priority for our office. And so we actually have a method now. We organize, we have regional recovery meetings. We're able to track, and I bring these processes with me from the military through Excel spreadsheet. We're able to track, every single project worksheet, and as it moves through agencies, and to hold the bureaucracy accountable to make sure we get that money, both in terms of the throughput of the money, that it gets to the communities that it needs to, but also then that it's spent efficaciously in an integrous manner. And I would tell you that these monies obviously went to rebuilding our infrastructure. It's helping rebuild houses in streetscape. It's facilitating recovery. It's a mixed story. Here we are now in 2013. We have some communities like Wyndham. They actually have more small businesses than they had the day before the storm. And I have some like Prattsville. This is going to be an important year for Prattsville. We're still on the way. Now, I think a year from now, we're going to be even better than we were before the storm. But, all these monies were critically important to our communities. And in fact, as you point out, Jonathan, we worked together to make sure that as we wrote the legislation for Sandy, that it included a completion of the recovery for Irene and Lee. And let me just conclude with this, though, that all those efforts to date have been towards reconstruction and facilitating growth. We also should recognize the fact, and I'm not looking for an ideological debate here, but we've had 3 500-year floods in the last half dozen years. So we've got changing weather patterns. And what I'm pushing the state towards is what is the plan in the watershed that water will move through it? Whether it be a 4-inch, an 8-inch, a 12, dare I say 14. We need to have contingency planning in place on how we're going to deal with events here in upstate New York communities. And that means, in some cases, that means actions that take place in the D-14 to the D-Day of when these storms hit. I'm engaged with not only the state, but New York City on this score and the federal government because, I think that there's more that we can do in terms of levels in the reservoir, a comprehensive plan in the watershed. That means in some places taking the energy out of the stream that we did through man-made activities that, basically made a stream move straight, which picks up energy over time with floodplains. But it also means where people live, that there may be some maintenance that's required right where we are. So it's like so many other things I've found. It's not all one way or the other. It's not all, allowing the stream to meander and work, but it's not all dredging either. It's a mixture of approaches that we at once can deliver clean water to the city, but that also we remember that we have people who live in those communities and they need justice and have a flourishing form of life as well.
This is one of the first votes I took in the Congress, and I'll tell you, it was a real education when I watched 167 members of the other party vote against Sandy relief for New York. And some of those same guys, by the way, were back a few weeks ago in the tragedy in Oklahoma arguing for federal assistance, who vote against us. So that is the kind of nonsense in Washington that, we're up here talking about putting an end to. When people are suffering, you need to help. And the first thing, one of the first things we did right out of the gate was we put together a list of items for the governor's office that is coordinating the federal dollars. We did that in cooperation with the 4 counties that I represent, or parts of them, with the county executives, with the town supervisors, with the local folks. We got a list of about $100 million in projects. The number one item on my list is the Wallkill River, which if it floods again when the crops are in the field, is going to wipe out a lot of the farmers in the Black Dirt region. That's why I wrote a provision in the Farm Bill to have the Secretary of Agriculture use his authority to mitigate flooding in the Wallkill. So working with the governor's office, I think we are going to do a lot of good stuff. Thank God in Sandy we had less damage in my part of it, and probably in Chris's, than certainly to the south of us. But it is not a reason why we shouldn't access the damage mitigation dollars in the federal programs, because we've got to prepare for these superstorms. We also have to get serious about the reality of climate change, and we've got to get serious about the kind of planning Chris is talking about. So working with, another thing I did, which I think is very important recently, and Chris is helping with this as well, is I have a bill to reauthorize the National Dam Safety Program. We have 100 high-hazard dams in the communities I represent, which means if one of those dams fails, someone's going to die. There's going to be serious loss of life or property. We've got 800 dams that need inspecting. The federal government has always, for a tiny amount of money, provided the technical assistance and the inspection services for local communities and for private associations to get information on whether their dams are going to fail or not. In an era where we have more and more frequent superstorms, more severe and more frequent superstorms, you got to know whether the dam's going to fail before the storm hits. That's what my bill would do. Be a drop in the bucket to do it. So in area after area, we have to work together to do what works and what's smart. And we've got to come together when people are suffering. And I'm happy that on a bipartisan basis, we've in this area done the right thing for New York, and we should be able to recover and move forward. But shame on us if we don't prepare for the next one at the same time.
I think I want to thank both Congressmen. They really were supposed to be out of here between 9:30 and 9:45, and we're past that already. And I thank them both for actually sitting here patiently with us. I thank you as an audience for also listening. And with that, a round of applause, please.